So the Lost Namekians were a concept introduced in the Granola arc to essentially explain why there were Namekians on planet Serial. But during that whole exchange, it's actually established that there wasn't just Namekians that ended up on planet Serial, there's Namekians everywhere. Now it's important to remember that when the Grand Elder is teaching his students about the Lost Namekians, he isn't sure what happened to them. And it's also established here that the Namekians as a whole came to Universe 7 from another realm altogether. Now this is important because it sort of explains why Universe 6 and Universe 7 have Dragon Balls and why the Namekians aren't really that different in Universe 6 from Universe 7, because they have a very, very similar history and aren't necessarily opposites created by mirror universes in the same way as the Universe 6 and Universe 7 Saiyans. They essentially all came from the same source and then gravitated into Universe 6 and Universe 7, and they didn't just end up on Namek, they ended up on multiple planets everywhere. Now, essentially the entire point of the Granola arc was to establish that selfish wishes will doom you, and that selfless wishes and actions will essentially cause the best possible scenario in every case, and that the Dragon Ball's purpose is to create hope for the future. Now, it was also established in Dragon Ball Super that the Namekians, specifically the Namekians, were the ones that took shavings from the Dragon Balls in order to create their own. But why? Why in the world did the Namekians decide to take shavings from the Super Dragon Balls to make their own Dragon Balls? If you look back at the history of the Namekians and Piccolo as a character, we sort of get an idea of what may possibly be the case for the existence of the Namekians. Now, when Kami first created the Dragon Balls, he said that he did so out of instinct. It was something that he just felt he needed to do. And that sort of shows you that there is a connection between the Dragon Balls, Zalama, and the Namekians. But what exactly is the connection? Well, I actually would like to propose that the Namekians are, in fact, the expelled evil of Zalama himself. And the reason I think that is because I've come to the conclusion that the Namekians, at their worst, are essentially no different than Piccolo Daimao. Now, when I say they're no different than Piccolo Daimao, what do I mean? Well, Piccolo Daimao plays on the Chinese version of what a demon is. Essentially, a demon within the Chinese context is a being who puts their survival over all things, and they refuse to reincarnate within the Buddhist context. So, the themes of Piccolo's character all the way back in Dragon Ball play on this concept of what a demon is in Chinese mythology. And that is essentially the source of all evil within this context, because everything that you do that is selfish, in most cases, is derived from your need to survive, dominate, and thrive over your environment. So if that's the case, the motive for the Namekians likely shaving shavings off of the Super Dragon Balls is their own survival. So essentially the idea is that the Namekians wanted to continue their existence, and so they'd likely shave shavings off the Super Dragon Balls to create hope for their species, and in doing so, unless they use a specific type of person to make that wish, who isn't doing it with selfish intent, they are essentially dooming themselves. So this is the idea. I've noticed, after watching Dragon Ball for years and years and years, and studying the Namekians, that the Namekians are stuck in this perpetual loop of doom. And the Namekians themselves are aware of this, because that is the entire point of the ritual that the Namekians have to go through in order to essentially establish who a worthy Dragon Ball user is because they refuse to let evil beings, and again, evil within this context are selfish beings who put their survival and life over all others, they refuse to let those type of beings use the Dragon Balls, which is why it was so important that Vegeta and Frieza wanted immortality on Namek, because that establishes what the Namekians think is the inappropriate, incorrect way to use the Dragon Balls. Now, why would the Namekians come to this conclusion? Well, it's heavily suggested that the Namekians came to this conclusion due to experience. And this is heavily suggested not only through the ritual that the Namekians have to go through in order to gain access to the Dragon Balls, but also the Namekians' history, the history of the Namekians themselves. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Dende talks about how they plant trees on planet Namek in order to restore planet Namek to its previous glory after some sort of cataclysm. Now, if you really just stop and think about it for a minute, what is stopping the Namekians from using the Dragon Balls to essentially restore their planet? What I'm speaking of here, in terms of the ritual and, how picky the Namekians are when it comes to using the Dragon Balls. That is why they are so picky in terms of who and who should not use the Dragon Balls, and that is the reason they do not use it to restore their own planet, because they have learned through experience that using Dragon Balls for such things, when there is no one pure of heart to do it with pure intentions, essentially causes their own doom. They essentially are perpetuating this cycle where they make this wish, they make this selfish wish, it brings doom onto them, and they do it to survive, but they do it to survive with selfish intentions, and that is the reason that they are stuck in this perpetual cycle of doom that they can never ever escape. Because what likely happened is years and years and years and years ago, when the Namekians took shavings from the Dragon Balls, they used them in order to prolong the existence of the race. Because remember, Piccolo was the purified evil that was derived from Kami, and if you look at his characterization, he essentially put his own life, his own existence, his own power over everything above everything else. Whereas Kami, he essentially lost his will to live, so much so that he was willing to die in the original Dragon Ball because he had purified himself of evil. And again, within this context, evil is associated with our need to live. Because it doesn't matter how good a person you are. When it comes to survival, when it comes to the need to live, we make decisions that we would never, ever, ever make. And so Dragon Ball is essentially playing on this idea through Kami and Piccolo Daimao. Now, it would make perfect sense to me if in Dragon Ball Daima, Akira Toriyama chooses to play on all of this, seeing as how Piccolo Daimao was demon themed. It would not shock me a bit that he plans on playing on the demon aspects of Namekian culture again in Dragon Ball Daima. I do not think that we are going to get Zalama as like a key player, like a huge player in the series. I don't think that at all. I think because it's demon themed, if we get anything regarding the Namekians, it's going to center around probably the mistakes of their past and what likely led them to be stuck in this perpetual cycle of doom. I do think that we're going to get stuff in terms of the Namekians' history, but if you really look, you really dissect everything that happened with the Namekians in the past and the overall narrative that's being portrayed in the Granola arc on Namek and the Piccolo Daimao arc, and how easily Kami's past and what he went through can essentially connect to the entire Namekian race's history. I think that essentially what Kami did whenever he landed on Earth, became evil, expelled himself of evil, and created the Dragon Balls, is he essentially repeated history. He repeated the process that Zalama or other Namekians themselves have went through in the past. Now, what's really interesting about this is the Grand Elder actually says that it's a shame that Kami and Piccolo did split, because they would be a super Namekian had they maintained their original form. Now, this is very interesting, because this establishes that the Namekian's goal, unlike the Guardian of Earth, is to essentially not expel the evil within you, but essentially control it and use it for what it's supposed to be used for. And that makes perfect sense given the fact Kami and Piccolo, prior to splitting, were a master martial artist. Naturally, they had essentially dedicated their life to martial arts, and so do the Namekians, because the idea of martial arts is to essentially take your inner demons and use them for what they're supposed to be used for. And your inner demons in this case is what you use in order to survive in a life or death scenario, your survival instincts. That's essentially what they're talking about when they're talking about your inner demons. As a martial artist, you only use that aspect of yourself with pure intentions. Now, Akira Toriyama took this a step further by essentially having Piccolo become what Goku was as the legendary Super Saiyan on Namek. It was established in the original Dragon Ball that Goku was the ideal Dragon Ball user who eventually showed up to Namek and used his wishes correctly in order to ensure the rebirth of the Namekians. Piccolo has come full circle in the sense that he has become the legendary Namekian warrior, the legendary hero that the Namekians themselves have been wanting throughout the generations, and that is a really cool thing to play on for future lore, especially when it comes to the demonic aspect of the Namekians themselves. It's very likely that Akira Toriyama plans on also playing on the extremes of the other end of Namekian development through Dragon Ball Daima. And I really do hope that Dragon Ball Daima takes advantage of the opportunity to expand on the origin of the Dragon Balls, the origin of the Namekians. But given the title of Dragon Ball Daima, I would not be shocked at all if he does plan on expanding on the evil aspects of the Namekians and their past and their history. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.